Hello, welcome to the Sharp Angles podcast. I am Dan Pizzuta, joined here by Hribar. Rich, it's still just plugging along. The offseason draft creeping closer and closer. How are we doing today?
We're doing good. It seems like we've kind of hit that pause, right? Like free agency's kind of like really withered down. There's a couple guys floating around, but maybe nothing happens really until after the draft at this point. And that's kind of where we are. We're kind of just sitting on our hands, I think, really kind of getting into draft mode. And you and I have been writing up all the team needs pieces for all these teams and kind of getting into draft mode ourselves. And that's kind of just feels like where we're steering the ship right now.
Yeah, it's wild because we've been doing all this team need stuff, and it kind of feels like there should be more free agency things happening just because of some of these depth charts that we've been looking at. Like there's teams that have like 3 guys at a position. Like I think we were right now, even just like the Browns, who like have a decent like defense, and I've been writing up the defense, you've been writing up the offense. The Browns have like 3 interior defensive linemen like on the roster right now. Like it's not going to be a problem, but obviously just like players need to be there. So it feels like there are going to be some of those smaller moves that at least coming in probably now from the draft, like you said, probably a little after the draft is where we'll get more stuff coming in. But I think like even at edge rusher, they have like 3 guys. And like when one of those guys is, Myles Garrett, you don't really have to worry about it because like the position's going to be fine. But like there just needs to be some players who are coming in on like a lot of these teams.
Yeah. There's a couple teams like that so far where, we had the Bears who just really have Cole Kmet and they have Jesper Horsted. They just re-signed on a 1-year deal, who was an IRFA. We're submitting the Buccaneers, who are obviously waiting on Rob Gronkowski, but really the Cameron Brace, their only tight end right now on the roster. A lot of those types of things still are floating out there. You'll get that, the end of the undrafted rookies too. You'll have a slew of signings right after the draft as well. But it really seems like teams are kind of in that mode of like really kind of to see like what they come out of the draft with at this point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because especially like for some of these like top guys, we've seen like Tyrann Mathieu. We've talked about him for the past like 2 weeks about like whether he's going to sign. I think he was just in New Orleans, which we'll get to the Saints in a bit here. And
of course, the Rams are interested because they're interested in every player.
Yeah, but it also seems like for guys like that, if you wait till after the draft, that's now like an official cutoff date for the compensatory pick formula. And I think that's been moved up. It used to be like we're not totally sure when the comp pick formula like stops, when there's a deadline there. Teams just kind of did their best guess of when that would happen, like at some point in the offseason. Now I believe it is like a firm after the draft. So I wonder if we're waiting for like some of those bigger guys there, like a Mathieu, if teams are going to, because he'll probably get, a decent sized contract. And we'll see that happen after the draft, just so teams can lock in some of these comp picks that they do expect to have. And I think we'll see, some smarter teams do that. Although if it's the Saints, like they don't care about picks. And so let's get into that, because since the last time we talked, the Saints and the Eagles made a draft pick trade, and we're talking draft now. So we'll try to break this down much more easily than the original Adam Schefter tweet that went out. So the Eagles. Okay. Let's
good start already.
Yeah, because so the Saints picked up the 16th, the 19th pick, and 194th pick. For the 18th pick, 107th pick, 237th pick, a 2023 first, and a 2024 second. So I guess in some ways the Eagles had 3 first-round picks, right? They wanted to – it never made sense that they were going to make 3 first-round picks. Like they could use it, but obviously like that's a lot of money to also like give up in 1 year. And actually, if you look like down the line, having 5 or 3 fifth-year options at the same time is actually like a lot to put on your cap, like for roster management. And obviously that's like super far down the road, but I think the Eagles are a smart team that's going to be doing that. For the Saints, again, this is like a theme of the show that we've gone for the past like a couple weeks here. Like, I don't really know what the Saints are doing, right? You would think if you're giving up that type of future draft capital, like it's for a quarterback, but you're only moving up to 16. And like you do have 19. So maybe, a lot of people have said this is like a move that like precludes a move that is going to be another trade up. But like, if you're doing that, and like, wouldn't you just rather have that 2023 first as like something to entice one of those teams
right
to move up. Like, this feels like an unnecessary thing to have to do. So if it's the one thing, like, if it's for a quarterback, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Saints because there's so much draft capital. They have Jameis Winston now. They've signed Andy Dalton. I don't think they're a quarterback away. If it's not for a quarterback, this feels even worse.
Yeah, I actually do think that's where we are too. I really just think the Saints genuinely aren't like they have no interest in punting. We've talked about this for the last couple of weeks, right? Like they are a team I believe that they believe they have enough talent. They're in a division that they believe they can compete in, even if they don't beat the Bucks. Although they've beaten them 4 times in a row in the regular season the past 2 years, anyways. I genuinely believe that they still believe that they have enough there to kind of compete, and they're trying to just get more talent on the roster immediately. So that's kind of where I believe the direction they're going, because if you add up the quarterback pieces, like you said, it just kind of doesn't make sense because one, you just signed Andy Dalton the week prior, who is before that perceived deadline, right? He's probably going to cost you a compensatory pick now that you were going to get for Terron Armstead. So you sign him, you sign Jameis Winston right after you miss out on Deshaun Watson. Now, none of those salaries that those two players got kind of preclude you from taking another quarterback if you want to take one of the rookies at 16. Or what are they at, 16 and 18 now? I forget what they are right
16,
now.
19, yeah.
16, 19, sorry, yeah. You can still take one of those guys there, but I don't think it's necessarily a trade-up spot because, like you said, you would use that one to get higher instead of just kind of like shuffle around a bunch of picks. But, I mean, who really knows what's going on? I think this is a clear Eagles win trade in terms of like war value, what you're getting in return. You know, they're moving back and having the option to kind of give Jalen Hurts another year, see if they've got more ammunition the following year. You added the having the third, fifth year option on your books, and you pick up another second round pick in the process next year, another future. I still think the NFL undervalues future picks tremendously.
Oh,
I think
absolutely. So yeah, this is going to be a rant. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like a lot of teams like just historically discount those future picks, and like when you're proving it in present value, like if you use like the Jimmy Johnson chart or whatever, like you discount it like a full round at some points. Like that doesn't make any sense because like that first rounder is never going to be a second round pick. So like, why are you counting it as a second round pick right now? Right? Like at worst case, it's going to be a first round pick. That future first is never going to turn into a second. So I think we see teams like the Eagles and teams like that who are valuing those as first round picks, like they should be. And like there's the potential here. Like I tweeted this out like as soon as it happened. There's the potential the Saints aren't good this year. Like that's certainly possible. Like I understand in the Saints' point of view, like what they went through last year. Everybody was injured. The team was bad by Saints standards, and they still almost made the playoffs, right? So they expect everybody to be healthier this year. They expect to be a little better. So like I can see why they think they're going to be good, but like there is a certainly high, but I would say like a decent probability that the Saints are not good, right? So
we're not good enough, period.
Right. So like there's a chance for like for the Eagles, it's a clear win because I think like you think this is maybe like a pick in the middle of the first round. Like if you're thinking about it from the Eagles' perspective, if the Saints are like pretty good, then like maybe that turns into the 20s. So like you're not losing that much. But if the Saints are terrible and that turns into like a top 10 pick, like that's a clear win for the Eagles. So I just think like there's so much more for the Eagles to get out of this than there is for the Saints trying to get like these 2 first round picks and doing whatever they're going to be trying to do. Outside of that, and like we've talked about like the Saints cap for a while. Like obviously, like getting under the cap it's not an achievement; it's a rule, right? Like you have to do it by rule. So like saying that they're under the cap and they're working all these contracts, like yeah, that's what they have to do. And again, like if there is like finally like a bad season for New Orleans, like then they really are. That's when they get into some trouble there. And I think that they're really teetering the line with this trade and what they think they are right now.
Yeah, I kind of see it like that's the plan. This is just how Mickey Loomis is operated until he tells me, like until he actually shows me. Otherwise, I'm gonna always believe that he's always the George Bluth. There's always money in the banana stand, right? That's how he runs this team. That's how they've run this team for the last decade plus. So that's how I see it. Is they're kind of trying to get like a jump start on like the kind of like roster depth and like positions now to compete. They've got holes everywhere, though. They're a team that we're actually like the process of doing. Today they're one of the teams on Thursday that will be coming out, and there's needs all over the board here for them. So I believe it's try to get multiple pieces now, but I think it's going to end up costing them in the long run. But that's how the Saints, that's how they roll, man.
The other thing, like say these two picks are like for like a tackle and a wide receiver, which are two positions they need. At this point, at 16 and 19, you might be getting like tackle 4 and maybe wide receiver 3 or 4 at that point too.
Maybe
so like
wide receiver 5 or 6 at this point.
It's kind of it's a crazy move to be making this early. It's a move where like if it happened on draft day, like it's still bad, but at least like you understand who's on the board at that point and like who you're trading up for. But right now it's weird, man.
Also, the Andy Dalton signing, like this is an egregious signing, like on so many levels. We talked about the compensatory pick. Like he might cost you a compensatory pick for a backup quarterback that like is like, what do you get out of having Andy Dalton on your roster before the draft? Like, what do the Saints gain? Like, where was the market that they had to jump to put him on this roster before the draft?
Man, I can't tell you. At least it like stops us from the Taysom Hill quarterback thing. I don't know. Like, is that
maybe? I mean, listen, it has to still exist in some, the darkest timeline that still exists.
I don't know. All right, let's move on.
It's not like he's not going to be on the roster.
I was looking at the Taysom Hill contract, and it is insane. Still.
I mean, you're telling me if I set the over-under on 0.5 pass attempts for Taysom Hill, you're still going to take the under next year?
He'll throw a pass, but like we won't have him starting a game at quarterback, which I think helps us all. All right, let's move on to better things that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about some draft wide receivers, and like some of them. At least one is probably going to end up on the Saints at this point, but let's dive into this because this is a fun class. I don't think it has like the highs that we saw from like maybe even like the past 2 years, right? Like there's no Jamar Chase in this class. I'm not even sure there's like a Jalen Waddle who, I liked a lot coming into the draft last year. But there's a lot of really good players, and like we've talked about it, it feels like there's just always going to be good wide receivers. Like we're never going to have like this year's quarterback class of wide receivers.
We've talked about that.
It's not going to happen anymore. At the high end, you can debate on whether we get like these great wide receivers. But I think there's so many players here, and I think one of the reasons this is such a fun wide receiver class is because there's so many different types of receivers in this class, and kind of like how you view the position, what you value is kind of how you feel about these guys. And that's one of the reasons I'm kind of excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I think too, even before we start getting into kind of like the meat and potatoes of the players a little bit, just how we can maybe talk just a little bit and touch on just how this offseason may impact how teams aggressively play the wide receiver position too as well. I mean, we have seen the wide receiver market go bananas, and not even the top 3 guys that basically like reset the market again after the trailing that Deandre Hopkins money that you talked about a couple weeks ago. Because those are like the 3 of the top 4 best wide receivers currently in the NFL anyways. So like those guys were always going to kind of like set the tone for the market. But when you have the Christian Kirks, like we said, getting paid more than JC Jackson on the open market, and teams start to realize like having these rookie wide receivers on rookie contracts, because you need 3-4 guys now on your roster. You need to go deeper than that, especially when you have injuries. Even like a team like the Buccaneers, who were dead set at wide receiver last year, right? How did they finish the season? Strictly just having Mike Evans and then needing other guys to step up, and they couldn't get it out of any of those players. Like you kind of almost never have enough wide receivers. And then when you're talking about like the contractual depth element, teams I think are going to really start exploring just consistently adding these guys, because having these guys on rookie salaries is going to turn out to be such an advantage. So you don't have to overpay for some of these guys like the Kenny Galladay's and the Christian Kirks in free agency.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like if you have that top wide receiver, you are going to have to pay him one way or another, right? You're either not committing to it, like, and we saw that with Tyreek Hill and Devante Adams, or like you are committing to it, which we just saw with Stephon Diggs. He still had 2 years left on his contract, and it was a below market level contract like the minute he was traded. So like that was going to come up at some point, but also like after we saw the contracts from Adams and Hill, like obviously the Buffalo was going to have to make that right a little bit. And this is one of the things, like it's also one of those things, and like get into like a little bit in the weeds of some of these contracts. And like we kind of did it with like the Devante Adams thing where like these guys aren't really making like 28, $30 million a year, but that number is out there, right? And so these contracts are being structured in a way where like this new money does have to come in, and a lot of these contracts like at least have to be figured and structured in a way where like they at least at some point you can say, the agent can say, the player can say that these contracts are 28 to $30 million a year, and even just structuring those where that number is fake, I think kind of can hurt some teams at some point. But if you have the receivers, if you have, gotten your cap to a place where you can do that. And I think like this is also like one of the things we can kind of come back to the Saints here. Like for the draft capital they gave up, like they could have like had a Devante Adams or Tyreek Hill, like that's the same type of like draft pick compensation that these teams are bringing in. But like when you're the Saints, you don't have that potential to put that contract on your book. So that's a part where like, even though the Saints are under the cap and you can like say they can like manage the cap, but I think like that's how some people would frame that. Like you can't bring in those really big contracts. And like the Saints would be better off like if they could have been in the Tyreek Hill conversation, but like they can't put that contract on the books, but you're giving up the same type of draft capital. So I think like that's a lot of where like this comes in too. So I think if you're a team, you have to, I think, be willing to pay a receiver at some point, right? I don't think you're either paying a guy that's on your roster, or you have to like be able to look out and see what you can get, right? There's like DK Metcalf trade rumors. So like even if you don't have a DK Metcalf on your team, you're looking to see if you can acquire a DK Metcalf if his team is not willing to pay him. And I think like we talked about it also last week, like we might be seeing some of that a little more as these wide receivers, kind of are potentially like on the market now, just because that top end just like exploded out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some fringe guys coming up. Like Deontay Johnson's a great example, who I think is a really good player, but is he a player you want to give $20 million, to? Like, teams are going to have to make those decisions on those types of guys. Even DK Metcalf isn't like fully like hit like his apex either. AJ Brown's getting a new contract. Terry McLaurin's going to get a new contract. That whole 2019 class is up. So, I mean, yeah, then you've got a team like the Bengals who are sitting on two young wide receivers, right, on rookie contracts, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and you'll have to pay Joe Burrow. The penalty for drafting well, right, like for doing the job well, like, and they don't have to deal with this for a couple seasons still until it gets to that point. But those are things that are going to be on their plate in terms of they might have to choose. They might have, like T. Higgins actually might be like a roster casualty at that point just because of what they're going to have to allocate to Burrow and Chase. So those are things we'll see what happens down the line. But yeah, I mean, if you're coming into this NFL draft, though, I mean, I still think that you're going to see a lot of teams be aggressive on wide receivers, not only because the team needs, but also just the way it's kind of shifted the marketplace at the position.
Yeah, and one of the other things, like with so many good wide receivers coming, we're seeing these guys make an impact, right? It used to be like it took for like year two, maybe, for like some of these wide receivers, and like only the best guys were making, a big impact in year one after they were drafted. And I think we're just seeing guys can be just put in roles, and I think there are more defined roles, and I think teams are better just kind of evaluating where these players fit and how they should use them. And I think we're seeing some things, just schemed up better. We're seeing immediate impact from rookies, and that kind of just shifts the entire landscape of that too. And I think like there's a lot of guys here, like as we like introed this, there's a lot of different ways you can use a lot of these guys that are going to be coming into the league this year. And it's just kind of like, how do you see them fitting in your offense? Do they fit in your offense? And I think you can find a guy for like pretty much anything you would want to do. There is a guy for that in this class.
Oh yeah, man. And we've seen that over the last couple of years. You talk about like CeeDee Lamb comes into the league and he's like basically thought of as like an alpha, and he basically strictly plays almost slot receiver for the Cowboys the past years. And people thought it was like a luxury pick, and like look at where the Cowboys are now in terms of like wide receivers. You like Jalen Waddle last year. He like the circumstances that the Miami offense fell into last year kind of dictated that Jalen Waddle be like this near the line of scrimmage player, but we know he can be so much more. So there is kind of like an opportunity here, and there's some versatile guys in this class that I think we'll see at minimum, I think 6 guys go in the first round, and I think there's a shot for maybe touching 8 wide receivers.
Yeah. So let's run through them. You have written up this wide receiver class. I will be doing that maybe for today, maybe on Friday. Hopefully I'll have something up here. So,
and to be fair, I write these guys up from like a stance. My wide receiver model is geared towards like fantasy points. There is overlap to actually, if you are productive for fantasy, you are producing in real NFL field. But all of my stuff is basically tied to hone in on like what is predictive to producing fantasy points. So that's kind of like where I come from, like my approach here.
Yeah. So we'll use that as the framework, and then we'll just kind of talk about these guys. So as you go into your model, because I think like if you said, if you can predict fantasy points, usually for the most part you are doing good things on the field. So let's get into who you have as the number one, and these can be found on the site, the 2022 pre-draft fantasy rookie rankings. We got Treylon Burks. And he is just like, he's such an interesting guy. And I think like we see the Deebo Samuel comps, right? And I think like you saw some of how like he was used, but also like he played wide receiver. And I think when you kind of use the Deebo Samuel, I think people are like trying to like pit him as this guy, like you need to, scheme him up, like either, behind the line of scrimmage or
like Percy Harvin
right around it. Yeah. And like Treylon Burks is good, man. Like he can make plays down the field. Like there's a lot of things going on. And I think just like, and Deebo can do that too, right? But like when you're like saying the Deebo role, it kind of feels like people are kind of discounting what Treylon Burks can potentially do.
Yeah, so my model actually is Drake London 1, who we'll get into, but I believe I have Burks one myself because I think his ceiling is the highest. And when I think about this from like an NFL drafting stance, if I was an NFL team, or even from even tying it into fantasy, like I think like what can this player be at his apex, and how can that alter what my team is? And I just think Treylon Burks has the highest ceiling. Like he has the ability to be like a Terrell Owens type player on like his apex range of outcomes. He could be like an AJ Brown type of player as well. He was a guy that, at Arkansas, like he was really their offense. I mean, they had to scheme him up. He played a lot in the slot. They gave him funneled a ton of screen passes, but there is an underlying number of metrics here that show like where he can win in the NFL and win in a big way in terms of the outside. So like I said, they used to run him in like stacks and trips like all the time, give him just quick hitters, let him use his like size. He's huge. He's 225 pounds. He's a monster. Although he did only run like a 4.55 at the combine, his tracking speed, we've already seen a number of people say like he's hit 22 miles per hour in this play, all those things. And we're going to see more teams kind of use that tracking speed anyways, that Brad Holmes has talked about this for a number of years. But so when the limited sample where we've seen Treylon Burks like play as an isolated receiver or play in man coverage or play on the outside, he's absolutely destroyed. Last year, he averaged 6.5 yards per route run against man coverage, against press coverage. When he was isolated as an isolated receiver, he averaged 12 yards per route run as an isolated receiver. Like he can win outside. He's got that frame. If you want to add like the more of like a repertoire in the NFL receiver, he has that a little bit more than London in terms of winning on what routes the NFL throws the most. So you see like a lot of in-breaker, slant, stuff like that. Like that's what you're going to see from Treylon Burks. My like pie in the sky thing is like he could be a Terrell Owens type player, like in his apex range of outcomes.
Yeah, and like as you hit on like the 40 time, I'm not sure there's a position I care about the 40 less than wide receiver. And that's going to be the funny as I talk about someone who I really like in this class. But I think you kind of like it's how do you use the game speed, right? Like, and again, like Keenan Allen. And he's like always the guy you prop up when you're talking about a guy who doesn't run a fast
Anquan
40.
Bolden. It used to be
Right.
Jerry Rice, now it's like Anquan Bolden. Devante Adams now.
But like Keenan Allen, one of my favorite receivers in the league, like since he came in. And like he doesn't run fast in a straight line, but the way he uses his body, the way he can run routes, like that matters. And I think Treylon Burks has that. And like a 4.55 is not slow, right? I think there was some hype around Burks that he could like have a faster 40 that he would be running in like the low 4.4s. So I think the 4.55 and like I was at the combine like with some other people like when that time came in, like it was a little disappointing. But at his size, that's still like really good. And you like watch how he uses that speed. And like he can still do like this start and stop. He had that play was against Alabama, right? Is it down the sideline? Yes, the sideline catch, he stops and makes the guy miss and then runs after the catch. And like you can see that he just has that ability. So like that's I think how we like need to frame that also. Like you said, you can just move him all around. He has that bigger body, so you can use him on the bigger stuff. But I think he does still have that speed where he can use like those yards after the catch also.
And he's the one guy I think that will be more translatable the way he was used near the line of scrimmage than a guy like how London was forced to be used near the line of scrimmage. At USC. I don't think London will carry as much like wide receiver screen stuff over into the NFL as Burks will.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about Drake London. Because as you said in your like actual model, he came out as the wide receiver 1. You have him like in your rankings as a wide receiver 2. Or sorry, the wide receiver 2, not a wide receiver 2. Those are very different things when you're talking about fantasy. So yeah, he is someone who I think the conversation around him is like really strange because like people look at him and see like the 6'3", like 6'4", he's like 220 pounds. And like they think he's like this guy who can't run. And I think you hear about like the separation issues. And like you just watch him and I don't think that there are separation issues. I think the separation issues are because the USC quarterbacks were not good. Right. And I think like you see some of that. I tweeted a play maybe a couple of weeks ago at this point, like against Notre Dame. He's running down the field like by himself. He gets behind the corner and the throw is like 5 yards behind where it should be. London has to come back because he's good at it. And it makes what turns into like a contested catch. But it's because the throw was bad. Like if there was a better quarterback and that throws in front of him, like he's running wide open for a touchdown. So I think a lot of those issues like come from the offense and we kind of have to see that. So I think like a lot of the issues that you might see with London where you're not sure if it translates to the NFL, like I just don't see them. And I think he's like really good.
Yeah, he's kind of he takes a little bit of projection just the way he was used. And, I kind of linked an article that Dwayne McFarland from Pro Football Focus wrote as well. And like, he just didn't really run a lot of routes that are like popular NFL routes, like the most targeted routes. And he wasn't particularly good on the sample that he did. I mean, he was, like you said, it was basically like all of his stuff is just like screen, pepper near line of scrimmage, or like kind of like double move, like stuff like that. But that takes a little bit of training, but he's only 20. He's 20 years old. This final year, he was only 20 years old this past year, and he was coming off that ankle injury. So I don't think he would have like been like a guy that tested like super well, anyways. And like people probably would have double counted that as well. But yeah, I think when you just factor in like his size, being able to play like outside, inside, just like the ceiling again. It's like I look at those two guys and like they offer like kind of like that, like everything. If everything were to hit, they have all these trump cards. Whereas you get into the leaner guys, which is what we're seeing in the NFL and the versatility guys. When we get into the Garrett Wilsons, the Olaves, Jameson Williams, even George Pickens, a guy that's not like a hugely built guy, even though being one of the bigger receivers in this class, the Jahan Dotsons. These two guys at the top, I think, like embody like kind of like that throwback, like they can be like that alpha, like X type of guy at their ceiling, but then they offer all this kind of like small man game too, that you typically don't see guys that are built like this offer. And I don't know how much it will translate. I think Burks will translate a lot more in London. He was a lot better after the catch, because you look at like London, even having all this screens, like the percentage yards that he created after the catch, 44% of yards after the catch, and he was 25th in YAC per reception. So it's like there are some missed tackle stuff that looks good, but when you add it all together, it was like created induced by volume where Burks is a little better per play. So I don't know how much London will carry over, but I do like that both these guys are starting off with like not the prototypical game you would see like guys built like this in the past, right? Burks gets comped to like Demaryius Thomas a lot, which was kind of weird, but I never really liked. But that's what you see from these guys, because they're not your prototypical 230-pound guys that are just like go routes and make contested catches.
Yeah. And I think the thing with London that I saw a lot when I was watching it was like he'll turn what should probably have been like a 6-yard loss into like a 3-yard gain. And like that doesn't look very good when we're looking at the stats and like his actual receiving yards. But like the actual like degree of difficulty there is huge. And like I think I'm not sure there was like a higher degree of difficulty in what they needed to pull off like than London when he had to be manufactured in these touches, and not because of him, right? It was because of that offense. They had nothing else there. They had no other receivers to throw to. I think when you look at like what his target share was and like targets per route run,
he was targeted on 42% of his routes, which is like absolutely
which
bonkers.
is insane. And he had like a 25% target share and missed like the last quarter of the season. So that's how highly he was targeted in that offense and how much they needed to rely on him. So I think like you will see what he can do. And like some of the contested stuff, like too, he had like one of the highest, the most targets of like back shoulder throws, but that's because he was like really good at them, like just like that body control, right? There's so much like start and stop there that I think he just like controls everything he does really well, which again does not need like top end speed to be able to pull that off, which is why like I'd also really like him as a prospect.
Yeah, I think his player prop to be the first wide receiver drafted is pretty enticing where it's at. I think he very well could be the top guy. I know Garrett Wilson is the most frequently mocked guy, but I do like to get a little bit I like to throw a couple pennies down on London being the first wide receiver taken.
Okay, so I'm glad you said that, and we're going to skip around in your rankings a little bit because we are going to hit my rankings. Someone I have put maybe a little bit on as the first wide receiver taken. Someone who Peter Schrager of NFL Network just put as the first receiver taken in his first mock draft. That is Jameson Williams.
I mean, if he didn't tear his ACL, I could have seen it happening, but I don't think he'll jump those guys.
Yeah. Okay. I love Jameson Williams. He is so good. And I like just kind of have confidence that he's going to return from an ACL. Like I don't want to say an ACL is not a big deal because obviously it is. But
it's the timing, I think, of the ACL.
That's the other thing. Yeah. But I think he at the Alabama Pro Day, he said he could potentially, be ready for training camp, which would be a very quick recovery. But if he's only missing maybe like a couple of games, I think what he gives you in the long run is worth it. And I think like we'll talk about his speed, right? Because he's so fast, and I hit that like the 40 time doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to gush all over this speed guy, right? But it's so much more than just speed. Like he's one of the best route runners in this draft. And I think like that gets overlooked because he's the fast guy who can run past everybody. But the way he sets up that speed. And I think is such an overlooked part of his game and what makes him so good. I think when you look at, I think it was a play against Georgia, one of the long touchdowns. He sets it up by like slowing down, pulls the angle from the safety. And he's one of these guys that has like geometry changing speed, right? Where like a safety or a corner like thinks they have an angle on what they need to do. And Williams just can change it just because of how fast he is. And when you look at, he had last year third in intermediate yards in college football and fourth in deep yards. And those are intermediate 11 to 19 air yards. Deep is 20 plus. Only 35% of his routes were deep last year. So he's killing on the routes he goes deep, but he's not just the deep guy. So I think he wins all over the field. And just like so much of what he does, I think like really translates. I've seen some concerns about whether like he can beat man coverage, but he had an 80% success rate against man coverage last year. That's per Sports Info Solutions. I like the way he profiles. Like I don't think it takes a lot of projection to see how he translates into like a really, really good wide receiver.
Yeah, I think he would have had a really good chance to push for being the first wide receiver taken if it wasn't kind of like the injury and maybe like what are you going to get out of his rookie year or like what's the timetable? Because typically, ACLs are a 9-month injury now, and he tore his ACL in the national title game. So, I mean, teams might put that into account. But like you said, you shouldn't stock it too much because of your rookie contract, right? You're going to have him. It's not necessarily like you don't need this guy to be good weeks 1 through 6, especially in the number of teams that are probably going to be picking in that area anyways. It shouldn't be like a huge deal. He's someone I expect to fully kind of like come on at the end of the rookie season. Because like you said, he was used as like that lid lifter, but he can do a lot more. I think we saw this with Waddle too and how it translated to his rookie season. That we'll see him kind of be more of like a full field wide receiver. But yeah, if he would have been able to run, I think he would have probably run really fast because everyone was running really fast at that combine. And it would have really helped his cause a lot in terms of the draft capital. But I just think the injury will probably have him be a gift to some team that takes him. I mean, I think he'll be a gift where he goes. Unfortunately, I don't think he'll fall to like where the hopefuls that have traded some of these elite wide receivers, like the Green Bays and Kansas City, saying like, well, maybe we can get James. I don't think he'll be there. But I think that definitely he's going to be discounted for where he would have been if he wouldn't have suffered that injury at the timing that he did. But unfortunately, he did suffer the injury. It does happen. It still is on his resume.
Yeah, that's it's one of the things where like I didn't really follow college football in real time. So like I wasn't like super aware of like what Jameson Williams was. So like obviously like watching the national championship game, like I knew it was bad that he, tore his ACL, but then like getting into like watching him and seeing the draft stuff, like I felt the injury again, like knowing how much I liked him. And I was like, oh no, this is the guy who tore his ACL during the national championship game. So like I had like this second wave of like feeling the hurt from that injury, of knowing like what the potentially like could have been, but and like it, if you're projecting like a full recovery again, man, I just like he's so good. And I guess like at 180 pounds is like a little light, but like you said, like we're kind of seeing some of that happen just kind of league wide. And I think he can play through some physicality. Like he's not going to be a blocker. Like he's not going to be like, he's not Robert Woods, right? And like, I don't think if you're drafting Jameson Williams, you're going to be asking him to play that role. But I think like for what he needs to do, man, he's so good. Just the smooth route running, the way he comes in and out of breaks, the way he can set up that speed. I just think he's a threat at every level of the field. And I think like more than any other receiver in this class, like I'm not sure you can say that, so much. And I think Wilson is just kind of like, he just kind of stands above, at least to me. So like he's going to be my like wide receiver. I don't really rank these guys because like I just don't need to. I don't need that in my life. But Jameson Williams is going to be like my favorite receiver and wide receiver 1 in this class. So,
and I have no problem with that. To be honest, like I said, I have him there from like obviously the model discounts him too because he is just a 1-year production, but we've seen like that's been like something that's been common like through Alabama. All these guys kind of get dinged in the model a little bit just because of the competition they play along with, and the amount they have to wait to contribute in the NFL. And that also happened to Jameson Williams. He was stuck behind the two other Ohio State guys before he transferred. So I mean, Ohio State had all three of the top 5 receivers were on their team.
And so we'll get into this because now we'll talk about the 2 Ohio State guys. Those 3 are not the best wide receivers like on the team. There's a guy who's better, who would be wide receiver 1 if he was out, but he's only a sophomore. And so that is Jackson Smith in Jigba. Yeah, I pronounced that right. So
you have lots of time to practice that one.
Yeah, I mean, for the whole year, but like he's going to be the first wide receiver. We can say that now, but like he should be next year. So I think he would be the first wide receiver taken in this class if he was eligible. But we'll get there. So Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are very interesting because they are also like, I think they are really like the epitome of like, what are you looking for in a wide receiver? And I think that's how you feel about Wilson and Olave, how you rank them, how you feel about their pro prospects, because they are very different receivers, right? They're both fast, which I think we quantified at the combine. Again, like I said, like the Olave was coming in at like a 4.26 or whatever, but that was shown to be a little slower on the official times. But when you look at Olave, and I think let's see, you have Wilson 3, Olave 4, and those come out the same as your models. So let's get into like, what do you like about Wilson and Olave? What separates them for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty. Anytime you have like a situation like this where it's 2 players on the same team and they come out so closely graded, it's easy just for me to kind of like edge towards Wilson because he was a little bit younger and outproduced Olave on the same field. So it's just like one of those, I'm going to side with that player and give him the edge. Olave is the guy, I think we talked about like projecting like ceilings versus floor. Olave is the guy, I think that we talked about all the players we touched on so far. I think he has the highest floor of all the guys that we've talked about. But I think in the apex outcome for all these players, like he's probably the lowest of all those guys as well. So he's a guy I think that fits just about like anywhere he goes. Like he fits more schemes and systems than probably all these other guys. But you're probably getting just a really good player out of him, which is completely fine. Whereas Wilson is a guy that has a little more yak ability. Like I said, he already played with Chris Olave and was better than him in terms of production. So, I mean, I don't see like why we need to get cute really that much in the weeds. Like we've done this with so many guys over years past where we get in the draft nicks are like, it's this other guy has this trait, this stuff doesn't play out that way. Like I said, I assure you the models account for this stuff. And you see this with Kenneth Walker all the time talking about his receiving numbers. And it's like, yeah, the Michigan State didn't throw to the running backs. I assure you that the model has accounted for a number of guys in the same bucket that their system did not throw to the running backs in terms of predictability. So I'm not really just going to go that far into it. I just have Wilson higher. He's basically another, when we factor in draft capital in the model too as well, he's basically a guy that's probably going to significantly separate as well because that's not in the model yet, which is another indicator in terms of bonus points here. Because he's basically, in terms of like grinding the mocks, like universally predicted to get drafted ahead of Olave as well. So that's kind of just the separator between the two, but that's not a knock on Olave. I think he's a very good player. I just think when you're talking like from a ceiling perspective, he's a guy that's, I think, just like more of like a safe straight line pick here.
Yeah, that's kind of where my disconnect is. And again, like I'm not like straight up ranking these guys, but it's kind of like in the quarterback conversation we had. And again, like these guys are better like in skill and in relation to like NFL prospects than the quarterback classes. But like, I don't know if like, I know exactly what I'm getting in Olave. And while I was watching him, I was like, I know exactly what role I want him to play. And get him on some crossers, like get him in the red zone. I think he was fifth in end zone targets last year in college football, and like you can see like the exact role he plays, but like, I don't know if I would pick him where I would have to in order to draft him, right? Because there's just like there are so many questions, like you said, probably the highest floor, But when you're just like looking at the yards after the catch thing, like really bothers me.
And the man
Like,
coverage stuff. It's man
yeah,
coverage and yak that's such a separator between him and Wilson.
like I really want to know why like Chris Olave, who is so fast, is Zach Ertz after the catch. Like there's something in my head that like that just doesn't make any sense, and like that, but that's what it is. Like he's not playing through contact. He can't break a tackle. And I'm not saying like can't, but like just has not. And you would like on accident you would think there would be like a 60-yard run after the catch, right? If you're like that fast and in that offense. And there just wasn't that, it just wasn't there. So I think he's so smooth as a route runner. It's like it's so easy to see why people like him. I just kind of have like I just want more like that. The skill set he has before the catch should translate better after the catch than it does, and like it just confuses me why it doesn't. So I like am continually perplexed by Chris Olave and like how that projects to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, in this draft class, of all the players that were invited to the combine, which was 40 wide receivers, he was 36th in this class in yards created after the catch, and then he was 35th in yards per out run against man coverage. So like those to me are kind of more like when we're talking about like taking a ceiling player, right? In the first round, I want my wide receiver. I want him to have that range of outcomes. Like sure, I might miss, but like I still want him to be able to turn into one of these guys that ends up being one of those 25 million annually guys on the books. And I don't know if he's that type of guy. I just don't know if he has that in his range of outcomes.
Yeah, it's wild. So like if you look at where he was, targeted on short passes, so 1 to 10 yards past the line of scrimmage, in his final college season, 39 targets, 29 receptions, 233 yards, 167 of those yards were air yards, right? Only 66 yards after the catch. And like, if you're not creating in that short area, and I get like he was, more on the sideline than some of the other guys, but like accidentally you think he like breaks a tackle and can run. 3 combined missed and broken tackles last year. 3 the entire season. Like we were just talking about Drake London, like he would have 3 on one play. So it's just it's weird. So like he's just like a player. Like you see how smooth he is. I know exactly what I would do with him if I got him, but like using a mid first round pick on him, I'm not sure. But Wilson, yeah, I think you look at like some of that quick twitch he has. I think he is like a jerky route runner where I think we can use like having so much body movement like and say that's like good route running, and sometimes it's not so much because it like can throw some timing off because it takes like a lot of time to set up some of those things. But I think that's probably something that can get worked out a little bit. I mean, what is interesting is just because so every year I put together this metric called target yards added, and it's basically just looking at wide receivers' yards per target compared to what the quarterback does throwing to any other wide receiver or any other player really in the offense. So it kind of like is exactly what the name implies. I was not very creative when I thought of the name. Like what is this receiver adding when he is targeted in the offense? And both of these guys come out pretty low. You look at Wilson, he's just I'm looking at these rankings here. He comes out 32nd in this class, like under a half a yard, and that is low. Like the average in this class right now is like over a yard and a half. And then you look at Chris Olave, he's negative. And there are just not really good wide receiver prospects who come out who are giving less than like the baseline receiver in an offense. So that's kind of my concern. And again, like we kind of talked about it, it's a little difficult because there were so many good wide receivers, and there was a better wide receiver in that offense who was not draft eligible. And I did like his calculations. If Smith and Jimba came out this year, like he would be wide receiver 1 in this metric. So like that's tough. But again, like it's maybe like when you look at like what Ohio State has been in the past, right? And I think like Jameson Williams is kind of in this conversation too. Like at Ohio State, there were times where Terry McLaurin had like a 10% target share, and he was not like the featured guy, but he also like came out way ahead of the other two guys who were Paris Campbell and KJ Hill in target yards added. So like there's a give and take there, but because there was like this one wide receiver who was so much better, it kind of hurts both of these guys in this metric. But for Olave to come out negative also kind of, I think I have like 70 receivers who have had negative over like the past like 6 years, and like the best one is Hunter Renfrow, and like he's the only guy that has like any kind of production. I think the second best guy is like Ty Montgomery, and like he became a running back. So that's kind of my hang up with some of these guys too. When you look at like the context of their offense, you know, they weren't adding as much as you would think like a top tier wide receiver prospect would.
Yeah, one of the most predictive statistics that we actually have for collegiate wide receivers in terms of NFL production is yards per team pass attempt. And both of these guys don't really show up that highly in there. That's why I also have Burks and London ahead of those two guys. Like if I was choosing, you know, for the range of outcomes, like I said, I have those two guys higher. And you look at like Jameson Williams, who played with like a John Metchie still, like he's smoking those guys. Like in that category as well, where he's 7th in this class, even playing alongside another good player, quality player. And then like Burks and London are just like yards ahead of those two players. So yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the same boat I'm in. I have, like I said, split between the two. Wilson, I think, offers more upside than Olave, but I also believe that Wilson being the wide receiver 1 is kind of a stretch as well for me. Like I can't get there all the way for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like that's kind of where we're falling on these guys. So let's
not bad players though. Not to say again, like, if your team takes one of these guys, like, oh, be mad about it. No.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing, right? It's not this isn't the quarterback class where we were like, these guys just aren't good. I think it's just, you know, you're looking at
context.
How are you using these guys? And like, there's certainly a place like if Chris Olave goes to Green Bay, right? That makes so much sense. Like I can see them using him like perfectly. Mm-hmm. So like there are roles for all of these guys. Yeah, it's a completely different conversation than what we were having at the other position. So let's speed through some of like these other guys. Is there anyone else in like maybe like the top 10 you think like really stands out that you're the kind of in on?
I mean, I'm in on for the most part on like most of these guys. Like we said, it's not the quarterback class. I don't know if there's anybody you want to touch on that's like maybe some of the guy like Skyy Moore is getting a ton of steam right now. I don't know how much Skyy Moore you've watched and like dug into, but he's the guy that's like really kind of like rising, right? And we saw this happen last year, and maybe it doesn't stick. Like Diami Brown was a guy that got steamed a bunch. Terrace Marshall got steamed a bunch. Like those guys end up not going as highly. Terrace Marshall for different reasons because the medicals. But like Diami Brown never quite got as high as like the perception was coming in. I don't know if we'll see that with Skyy Moore. I don't know if he'll sneak into the first round. I would say the first round would probably be a little bit of a reach for him as well, just because of what his archetype he is and projects to be in the NFL. And maybe we can debate about that too. But I do think he's going to be probably a top 50 pick though, for sure.
Yeah, Skyy Moore is really interesting because, like, if I go back to like target yards added, he like didn't add a lot to the offense in terms of like what was happening in the offense, just because like that offense was like so highly powered, right? Like there was so much going on. But like when you look at like yards per route run, targets per route run, target share, like he comes out like among the top of the class in all of that. But when you like do the context of the offense, that's really it doesn't stand out quite as much. But there is a lot to like with Skyy Moore, even though he's like only, you know, the 5'10", like under 200 pounds. Like his first step is so good. He had 433 yards on slants.
On slants alone, yeah.
On slants alone. That led college football. Number 2 was at 244. So like almost double the amount of yards on slants. So like you can see where he wins. And again, like 5'10", but he had 198 routes as an isolated receiver last year, which was 4th. And then I think you look at his hand size. I think he had like the biggest hands at the combine. Yeah. They're like a double Kenny Pickett's hands. There were like 10 and a quarter inches. So like there's a lot to like there. I think he was 8th in yards on intermediate passes last year. So yeah, you look at someone like that, like there is definitely a place for him in the offense. Like he's obviously not going to like sneak in the first round, which I think had maybe some buzz a little bit, but like he's going to be a guy where you take him on day 2, you kind of know exactly where he fits as soon as you put him in an offense.
Yeah, my only thing is like we just really have like no sample of him playing against good players.
Yeah.
And this is a thing with his teammate Dwayne Eskridge last year too as well. He was like Dwayne Eskridge was such a better athlete than every like player that they played on the field with, and it ended up getting him overdrafted. And I think Skyy Moore is a way more polished receiver than Dwayne Eskridge in terms of just where he could win at the line of scrimmage. But I do think that we're going to see him basically win on the interior in the NFL. And probably not as much on the outside. And, that might be like more of a little ceiling cap. That's why he'd be more of like a top round 2 guy for me. And, like there's but like George Pickens is a guy that maybe doesn't have as good as a resume and has a little more red flags than Skyy Moore, but his ceiling may offer a little bit more because of where he can win for a team. So it just depends on where your scheme fits and like kind of what you need. But I think Skyy Moore is one of these guys that will just have like a really like ultra high floor in terms of just winning on the interior in the next level.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that. So, there's some other, interesting guys here. I think Jahan Dotson's interesting because that quarterback play at Penn State was so bad.
He's a huge range of outcomes guy, right? Like,
yeah, like you see like a lot of what could happen there, and you see like why you should like him and why there are good things, but just like the production obviously is there just like because that quarterback play was so bad. Like that was my first note, like writing him down. For all of these other guys, you're like writing about the traits, and just Penn State is just like, wow, the quarterback could not do anything. I really like he can find space well. Yeah, I think he has like really good body control. You can see like, and he is one of those other kind of like shorter guys and shorter, slender. But I think like you can find that type of role. Do you have anyone who stands out? Like we do the inaugural, not inaugural, but more like annual, like the Quez Watkins awards. Do we have one of those guys in this class?
I mean, there's a couple. Gabe Davis was that guy a couple years ago for us too, and that's looking all right. But not Jalen Tolbert, I think, is interesting. But like, okay. I don't know where he'll be drafted. Like, he's a guy that could go anywhere from like the 3rd round to like the 6th, right? Like those are the types of guys that we have fun with, right? Like the Quez Watkins, who had a little bit of an opportunity last year. We'll say that it wasn't completely his fault why he couldn't seize it, but Tolbert kind of reminds me. He gives me like those Gabe Davis vibes, though. He's not like a prolific athlete, but where he wins is translatable. Like the things he's good at are where like are successful to the role he'll play in the NFL. I mean, he's a guy that just wins downfield. He wins in one-on-one coverage. A little bit older, went to like a smaller school at South Alabama. And Khalil Shakur from Boise State.
Yes, okay, there we go. Yeah, Rich, we are always on the same page here.
Yeah, he's another guy. I have no idea where he'll go. Like he could maybe go like in the 3rd round or like maybe like round 5 or 6. But he's another one of those guys. Like I say, if you like Skyy Moore, and I like Skyy Moore a lot, I think he's fine. But like where I believe he's going to win and be successful in the NFL, I think Khalil Shakur offers a lot of that as well. Especially on the interior. So I mean, you might get a little bit of like a poor man's arbitrage there. He doesn't have the 10-inch hands though, unfortunately.
No, but man, he's so fun to watch. He's a little bigger, 6 foot, like almost 200 pounds, like 196. He's a really good route runner. This short area quickness is there. He was 18th in yards on passes that were 1 to 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. And not like what you would expect from a 6 foot guy, but a red zone threat. He was 17th in red zone, tied for 12th in red zone targets. He had 17. Like he was the guy that Boise State went to in that area. And I think like against Nevada, he had like a crazy, like one-handed touchdown catch in the red zone, like on a fade. Man, he's really good. So yeah, he's going to be like my guy in that area. Tolbert, you said if we look at target yards added, you look at what he did. He had 10.93 yards per target. But when South Alabama went to anyone else, 5.88 yards per attempt, right? So he's like, that offense averaged like 5 more yards per attempt when they threw at Jalen Tolbert last year. And like, that's kind of like what you want to see in those like small school type guys. Like you want to see him either like be significantly the best guy on the field, both like in the offense and against the defense. And Tolbert was that. So he's definitely a guy that should be, he's third in target yards added for this entire class. And one other guy I like is Tré Turner. He kind of has that deep speed again, like was hurt a little bit by quarterback play. I think he has like when the ball did get to him, like 17.1 yards per reception. So like they weren't throwing a lot, but when I think he has the ability to like maybe be one of those, he's one of those like long, slender guys, 6'1", like 184. But I think he's one of those guys who could be like that deep threat that you maybe get on like day 3, in maybe that Quez Watkins type role. So they're a lot of fun guys. Like there's again, like no one that we like don't like. I guess
is there anyone that you think is like overrated?
I mean, if we like go back to like Olave, I mean, obviously, like you, by the conversation we had, like I'm not sure I would have drafted him like around like where he's going to be drafted, but like other than that, like I really don't see a problem with a lot of these guys. Like, man,
Alec Pierce is that guy for me. He's the guy that like people seem to like I can't get there on.
Yeah, I like him. He's going to come out well in target yards added. I think he's smooth. Again, he's someone who's better on like a per play basis than like what he did. Like obviously he's not not highly targeted. He doesn't come out well in like targets per route run or target share, which probably dings him in your model, I would think. But when he's the player,
I think when people talk about London, they're talking about Alec Pierce.
Yeah, it's sure. I could see that. Justin Ross is an interesting one. Like if I were drafting, I probably wouldn't touch him just because of what happened.
I think he's probably hurt himself pretty much at this point. He's probably gonna be a day 3 guy.
Yeah, so that's tough. But like other than that, like maybe like John Metchie is a guy, another guy who comes out as negative in target yards added, but put up like 1,100 yards in that Alabama offense. I just don't, the way his game translates, I don't really see it. So if he's going to be like a day 2 guy, there's so many other people I would probably rather take there. But like, again,
probably the most Steelers wide receiver ever, if there was one.
Yeah, probably. But like, I'm not going to like have a super strong opinion there. But he said like it's so much of like whatever you like in this class, you're going to find it. And like there are going to be people who did not agree with some of our assessments here. Do like some of these other guys, and I think there are going to be teams who like their draft boards are going to be probably potentially like wildly different just because of what they need a wide receiver to do. But I think that's what makes this class really fun.
Yeah, I mean, you have guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, who's like kind of all over the place. You got speed guys and like Tyquan Thornton, Calvin Austin, like Danny Gray. Like if you need those types of guys, it runs deep here. Like this wide receiver class goes like into the 20s of like you can find a path to success for this player in a specific spot in the NFL.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to strike out on this class if you're drafting one, which is good news for teams that need wide receivers, because I think everybody could use wide receiver depth at this point. So there are a few teams that don't.
Yeah, all these teams were writing up. There was pushback on me suggesting the Ravens still need wide receivers, but hey, you got Marquise Brown's another one of these guys, right? They have to pick up his 5th-year option. Like, what kind of contract are you going to give him? Yeah, we're in that boat now to see like what kind of salaries did like these fringe guys get.
Yeah, that I think that'll be like the interesting thing where you see some of those, the guys in that tier. So yeah, there we go. We'll be back. We'll continue talking about wide receivers. We still have too long until the draft, which it kind of seems like we've just, officially started talking about it on this podcast, but we've been, prepping for it for a while. So it's coming. We will, continue talking about this. You can find all our team needs. Write-ups are coming through. We're about halfway through. We'll be a little more than halfway through by the time you hear this. Again, we'll continue writing this stuff up. We'll be back next week, probably still talking draft, because that's where we're heading for that right now. So you can find Rich on Twitter at Lord Reeves. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Pizzuta. Thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.